Today we're honored to welcome Max Whalen to the show today. I'm very happy to have him on. He talks about so many different topics, but positive psychology and psychosomatic intelligence is what we're really getting into today. And these are some topics I covered in a little bit, but I'm very happy to have him on today because he talks about this a lot, and this is where his number one area of expertise is, right? He talks about this and has an amazing story. Now, positive psychology and psychosomatic intelligence are tools that we can all utilize in our lives today to kind of implement and make better decisions, really. That's kind of how I use it, right? It's been very informative in my own journey. Just being able to utilize these tools in our own lives, become the greatest version of ourselves every single day. And once we start to implement these things and see change, there's a positive momentum in our lives. That's when we start to kind of make that forward progress. So very happy to have him on. How are you doing today, man?
Thank you, Anthony. Really excited for this.
Definitely. Very curious to hear your story, how you got into positive psychology, and how you're being of service today.
Absolutely. So I got into the field really out of suffering, out of my own personal misery. So growing up, I wasn't a happy kid. In fact, for most of my childhood, I was severely depressed. I was anxious. I was, just had a really bad relationship with myself. And I always had this dream back then when I was 16, 17 years old. I thought to myself, if only I could become a professional runner, if I could win races and set records, then maybe that would somehow give me some amount of self-respect. Then maybe I could finally find the happiness that, like every one of us, I was always chasing, but I didn't really have the tools how to. And when I was 17, I was lucky enough to actually achieve that. I qualified for the German national team, and it was like in one moment, crossing that finish line, it was like all of my dreams had come true. And I remember waking up, walking off the field, tears of joy in my eyes. I was like, finally I can be happy. Finally I can love myself. And again, the next morning I woke up with these rose-colored glasses, and the next. And then I woke up one day and I kind of looked around and I was like, where's that happy feeling? It was just gone. It had vanished. And I realized that I cannot run from myself. I cannot out-succeed myself and my relationship with myself. And so I was very fortunate that at a very young age I recognized that no matter how much I could achieve or have, I could never find true happiness and fulfillment and self-love if I didn't change my relationship with myself and my body. And so that's really sent me on a, now decade-long quest really to uncover the art and science of happiness and figure out how do we optimize our brain as well as our body so that, we don't have to wait for the big win or for the promotion or for finding the relationship or for finally retiring or whatever it is that you have as a goal to feel great on the inside.
Wow. It's an incredible story, man. Definitely can relate to that. It's like you mentioned a lot of things in there, but building that high quality relationship with yourself is so important. I feel like that's kind of where it starts.
Absolutely. And, our entire society nowadays is built around tools and opportunities that enable us to run away from ourselves, to sedate ourselves, to drug ourselves. And I use the word drug here in a very general way, whether you're using alcohol or smoking or junk food or movies or social media to prevent yourself from actually sitting still and tuning into the sensations and the feelings and the thoughts and the worries that you might have inside. The craziest thing we do are usually in an attempt to escape ourselves. And so what psychosomatic intelligence is really about is rebuilding that connection with yourself and finding ways again to return to stillness, to return to feeling, to return to awareness of your thoughts, of your sensations, as well as of your emotions.
Definitely, yeah. Definitely returning that stillness, right? Because if we're distracted by things, it's very hard to actually know what we want and kind of live on purpose in a sense. So just being able to tune into what is real, that's where the foundation of success really is.
Absolutely. And it's a typical and normal, by the way, protective mechanism. Because what happens is when we suffer pain or trauma of any kind, is oftentimes it becomes so strong that it begins to overwhelm us. And so what we do, we cut the connection. We cut the connection with our feelings, with our body, and we begin living purely from the head. We begin thinking and strategizing and planning and distracting ourselves and watching more shows in an attempt to not feel. But ultimately, this is a Pyrrhic victory. Because while you might be able to sedate the pain, the anger, the sadness, the guilt, what also happens is when you cut the connection with your body, you miss out on the vibrancy of feeling alive. You miss out on joy. You miss out on the goosebumps of love. You miss out on the calmness of peace. You miss out on the heart-racing excitement, because you can only truly feel alive when you have a vibrant connection with your body. And so our job then is to find the courage to open again that relationship with our feelings, with our body, to recognize that true aliveness, and also, as you mentioned all the way in the introduction, good decision making demands that we make use of the wisdom of our body. Because we tend to think of ourselves as these logical and rational creatures that make decisions purely based on, the reality of the world. But the truth is that every single decision that we make, whether it's whom to date, what to do at work, whether to procrastinate or focus more on our goals, whether to go to a gym or eat chocolate cookies, those are not logical decisions. Right. Those are emotional, somatically driven decisions. And so you might have noticed in your own life, when you feel anxiety or stress or frustration or anger, do you treat people differently? Do you act differently? Do you choose differently than when you're in a loving and abundant and peaceful state? Of course we do, right? It's like two completely different people. And so our job then is not so much trying to grind it out through willpower, it's recognizing that my emotional state and my somatic state drives my decision making. And until I begin to heal that and face that, I'm going to keep sabotaging myself and stepping into the same patterns over and over and over again, wondering what is going on.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, you also mentioned you looking for the outside for happiness, right? And we always kind of reach that goal in a sense. But I really like to say it's more so about the process and who you become instead of the actual thing, right? Because then once we start to live in the now, that's when we can actually start to cultivate this fulfillment within.
That is absolutely right. And I mean, if we just look at the brain, it shows us exactly why this is happening, right? So dopamine, for example, which is this molecule of desire, of wanting, of craving. It's the thing that has made us human beings the apex predator on planet Earth. It's allowed us to build these skyscrapers, to invent, our telephones and all the technologies through which we now communicate. But it comes at a cost. And the cost is dopamine is the molecule of desire, of wanting, not of satisfaction and being. And so the trouble is that when we keep living in, I want more, I need more, and I need more, when we keep living in dopamine system, we've reached that goal, but it begins to feel empty. Because now dopamine spikes, and then it crashes back down again. And that crash feels as that kind of emptiness, that, kind of post-success blues, if you will, that many Olympic athletes and, Olympic champions actually experience, where you've had this incredible high, and you can never quite top that. And I've talked to so many elite athletes that were like, I won the Olympic championship, and now that's kind of it, right? You know that this is going to be the highlight of your life. And so dopamine plummets, and you actually fall into this kind of depression. And so what we got to do is we have to understand that if we're overplaying dopamine, but we're underplaying serotonin, which is the kind of contentment and fulfillment molecule, the ability to be at peace when you're sitting down with your friends at a great dinner, the ability to feel calm and joy at watching a beautiful sunset. If we miss out on this process, as you say, of living, on the process of actually enjoying today, and we're too much focused on the future, then we're going to overplay dopamine and we're going to underplay serotonin, and inevitably, no matter how big the success is, we're going to come crashing back down.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, can you describe what psychosomatic intelligence is? Because it's such an important topic, and how can we start to have a better understanding of that in our own lives?
Psychosomatic intelligence is really the ability to master both your psychology, and there's two different aspects to this. There's the conscious mind, the part of you that sets a goal and then makes a strategy to achieve that, as well as the subconscious mind, which is where your beliefs as well as your habits are housed. So that's one part. And then somatic, really from the ancient Greek word soma, meaning body, is the physiological aspect of how do you optimize your neurochemistry as well as your nervous system so that you feel good on the inside and you can make better choices on the outside. Ultimately, it's these three systems: our conscious goals, our subconscious beliefs about what I can do or what I'm worthy or what I deserve, as well as the nervous system state of anxiety and frustration or joy and abundance that dictates our decision making. And so psychosomatic intelligence is really a system I've developed over the last now more than 10 years to help people align these three systems so that all of them are pointing in the same direction instead of one thing going here. Your conscious mind says, I want to lose weight, but your belief says, but I love chocolate chip cookies, or I don't feel like I'm an athlete. And your nervous system says, I'm really too tired to do that. And so what we're really doing here is we're aligning these three systems so that change becomes effortless. Because, one of the big things that I see that holds people back is they live by this willpower myth. This idea we've cultivated in our society that, all you need is more willpower. That if you don't, achieve whatever it is you want to do, you just got to toughen up. You just got to try a little harder. But self-discipline and willpower are really just dressed up words for self-conflict. When I need willpower to do something, what that means is there's a certain inner resistance inside of me, and now I'm trying to fight that resistance. I know consciously, I should be eating that salad, but I really don't want the salad. And so now I'm trying to fight with myself. What we want to do is we want to overcome that fight. We want to let go of that inner friction, of the belief that, is saying, I'm not an athlete, or I don't deserve this. I don't deserve this body or this partner or this success. And once you do that, well, all of a sudden the friction vanishes away. And you charge forward almost like you unlock the handbrake on your car.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a big part of living in alignment.
Absolutely. And, one way I like to look at it is an orchestra. If you've ever seen, massive orchestra with dozens or hundreds of people playing, it's this beautiful symphony where every single instrument and every single person knows exactly what to do. And they're doing it in exactly the right way at the right time. Now, our brain works exactly the same way. There's all of these different kind of players that are fighting against each other, fighting together, struggling together, striving together, and they're either creating this beautiful symphony, or when they're out of alignment, now there's struggle, now there's self-sabotage, now there's frustration, anger, depression, all of the troubles that we have. And so what we want to do is we want to find a way to align both our mind and our body so it can pull in the same direction.
Definitely. And you kind of mentioned like how our beliefs kind of are a big impact on this, right? Just being able to have high quality beliefs on things, because a lot of us were operating out of limiting beliefs, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And so, why is that important? Well, there's a structure at the base of our brain called the reticular activating system. Now, that part of the brain acts as a kind of filtering mechanism for our reality. If you and I were consciously aware of everything going on, even in our rooms right now as we're recording this, of the pulsating of the blood in our left fingertip, of the heartbeat and the depths of our breath, and maybe the birds, I've got some birds outside here in front of the window usually. If we're consciously aware of all of these things, the contact of my feet with the ground, we're constantly processing all of that consciously, our brains would, metaphorically at least, explode. And so what the reticular activating system does, it filters out more than 99% of all incoming information to give or bring to the conscious awareness only those things that it believes are important to us. And so how does it choose that? Based on our goals and based on our fears. Those are typically the building blocks of our reality. Quick example. If you're walking down the street and you really gotta go to the bathroom, all you can notice is potential bathroom stores, right? If you're walking down that same street and you're starving, all you can look, see left or right is restaurants. If you're walking down that same street and now you're looking for love, well, all of a sudden, all you can see is pretty faces left and right. And so it's the same exact experience of walking down the street, but the brain filters different things into your reality depending on what you're actually looking for. And so our beliefs are one of those basic building blocks that filter our reality. If I believe I'm unworthy, then every conversation and every experience, every competition, every test that I take is going to be kind of like a judgment call from God telling me, yes, you're unworthy, you're right. And so I start looking for that in every relationship, in every conversation. I'm like, does she like me? Does he like me? Did he say that to hurt me? And I start filtering these experiences. Even if I have to make them up, I start filtering these experiences into my conscious awareness, thereby strengthening that belief. And so as you say, beliefs are really the building blocks of our lives. And if we don't manage to align them with our goals, we're going to keep sabotaging ourselves no matter how much we try.
Yeah, makes sense, because a lot of us were walking around these limiting beliefs and we wonder why we don't get the results that we want in life, right? We kind of we ask disempowering questions and all these different things. And I find a lot of times it's not that we have to overcome the external world, but we have to overcome ourselves within that, right? And once we start to align ourselves with these things, as you mentioned, it's so much easier to get what we want and kind of live on purpose and be of service.
Absolutely. I mean, Edmund Hillary, the first guy to climb Mount Everest, he said it so beautifully, right? That it's not the mountain that we conquer ultimately, but it's ourselves. And the key, I find, is really, like you say, getting out of our own way. The way I look at it is you have, in any field of your life, you have a certain amount of talent, of skills, of abilities. But what prevents you from actualizing this is all that inner friction that you have, those beliefs, those doubts, those insecurities that actually take away from that and kind of pull you down every time. And so when you're trying to perform at your best, but then you have a constant gnawing anxiety in your stomach that says you really can't do this, you're going to create this inner friction. Once the mind chimes in too much, we actually begin to sabotage ourselves. And the sort of goal really is, as you say, to get out of our own way, to get really out of their own mind. And this is especially true when we've achieved mastery in anything. Because what happens is when we achieve mastery in a language or in a certain skill, is that skill is so well ingrained inside the brain, it now operates on an unconscious level. What does that mean? Well, when you first, step into a car, for example, to learn how to drive, that is a purely conscious process, right? You have to think about, the steering wheel and the gas pedal and the brake and, not hitting any pedestrians, right? And you have to use the mirrors and all of these confusing things. And that's why the first time and second time and third time and the first 20 times are so overwhelming. But if you think about what happened now, today, when you got in the car to drive to work or whatever, you were singing along to Katy Perry songs, not minding anything. And so what happens over time is anything we repeat gets pushed from conscious awareness and effort into subconscious automation. And so it's running below consciousness where you don't need any more effort. But what happens then is you might be really proficient, but then you start thinking again, overthinking and over-planning and over-strategizing, you actually mess up your skill because now you just, bring your body into fight, flight, or freeze response, where your body is now anxious and tense, and you cannot perform at your best anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense. So again, it goes back to living in alignment and all these different things. Basically, kind of cultivate the life we want. Now, when it comes to positive psychology, can you define what that is and how we can start to integrate that in our own lives?
Absolutely. So positive psychology, my favorite way of looking at it really is emerged starting in the 50s and 60s with the work of Abraham Maslow, the guy famous for his pyramid or the hierarchy of needs. And what he discovered back then is that all of our resources were really devoted to fighting the bad, anxiety, depression, and loneliness. But very few resources we devoted to studying the good. And he said, if we want to find out how fast a human being can run, then you don't just go out on the street and you ask the first 5 strangers, hey, what's your marathon time, essentially. And that's not a direct quote. But no, you go to Olympic Games, to the final, and you study the greatest athletes in the world. And he said it's the same with every other area of our lives. If you want to find out how happy you can be, well, let's go and study monks. Let's go and study those rare air individuals that embody such a bliss and such a peace that it's contagious. If you want to find out the ultimate limits of human creativity, well then, let's find the most creative people alive. And so that's what positive psychology really is. Studying the best in any area of life, whether it's athletics or business or love or happiness or health, and understanding and really decoding what they do differently so that the average person of us can also improve our lives. Now, the reason I think this is important is because there's a vast distinction and difference between not suffering and truly being happy. There's a vast difference between not drowning and truly thriving in life. And so many times we just try to kind of get back to normal, to being okay, to alleviating the suffering and pain, but we forget that, just because you're not depressed doesn't mean you're truly happy. And so that's the kind of next level game then, is once you've reached that kind of place where you're okay, then you can look at, okay, how do I improve now? How do I bring more joy and more love into my life? And that's really, I think, how I at least look at positive psychology and what it's given us in addition to traditional psychology.
Definitely. Yeah, because if we're only studying the bad and negative, how do we expect to actually get what we want? Like, we have to actually study the things that we want to achieve in life, right? And it's such an important thing because I feel like, being happy, it actually requires strength. Like, all these things, because, negativity challenges are going to come up in the world. And it's not like we don't experience these things. It's not we don't feel these things, but it's really about, having the strength of character to move through them, understand that, maintaining the inner peace actually has long-term benefits, and we affect everyone around us as well.
Absolutely. You mentioned a couple of really important points here. One is positive psychology does not mean you deny the bad. Right? The reality is life sucks sometimes. Life is difficult. And every single one of us throughout our lifetime is going to experience heartbreak, loss, failure, devastation, ridicule, embarrassment, right? Those experiences are part of human nature. And so the goal is not to get rid of these. The goal is to see, how can I train myself and train my inner strength so that I can stay equanimous and peaceful even when life is difficult and challenging, and especially when life is difficult and challenging. And so it's this ability to develop this inner freedom that says, no matter what happens on the outside, I choose to stay present. I choose to cultivate peace. I choose to treat that person with love and compassion even though they wronged me, because that's how I stay in charge of my life. And so the key, as you said here before, is really switching and shifting away from focusing just on the negative towards what do I want to cultivate. Because here's the key. The brain cannot understand the command do not. And so here's a fun little game for our listeners to play. If you're not operating any heavy machinery or driving or anything, if you can, close your eyes for a second and try not to imagine. And again, do not imagine now a purple cow walking through your living room, making big cow sounds, and its hooves are kind of hitting the floor. And now do not imagine this purple cow coming closer to you and kind of licking your face with its huge tongue. And just notice how quickly, how many moments, how many seconds it took for you to bring to mind that purple Milka cow, right? I'm a Milka fan. And so what is the problem here? The brain cannot understand the command not. And so try something different now. Imagine, so this time please do, imagine a pink fluffy unicorn. The most beautiful fluffy unicorn you can imagine. And it's kind of circling in the sky, and now it's coming down to the ground to pick you up. You jump on it. And now you're flying with this pink fluffy unicorn, and it feels so good. You're flying into the sunset, loving life. And now just notice if you're still thinking about, the purple cow. Probably not, right? The moment we give our brain something new to focus on, the old drops away automatically. And so our goal is not to fight the old and say, I don't want to feel anxious anymore. I don't want to feel lonely anymore. I don't want to be depressed anymore. No, it's to say, I want to feel peace. I want to feel joy. I want to feel love. Now, how do I cultivate these?
Yeah, 100%. It's like when we start to add this positivity to our lives, a lot of times the negativity just falls off, right? It's like when we start to engage in positive habits, positive mindsets, positive ways of being, it's like you just understand within yourself, this is much better. This is much more fulfilling, and you no longer desire the other things.
Absolutely. And that's another beautiful thing is that once you shift towards this positive energy states, change becomes automatic. Because when you're feeling fully alive, when you step into abundance or joy, then working out becomes a lot easier. Being nice to your spouse becomes a lot easier when you feel love inside, right? And so our goal is not to try to fight our old habits with willpower. It's to ask ourselves, what do I need to do in order to align myself right now with the person I want to be, with the state and the values and the virtues that I want to embody, and then to focus all of our energy and attention on that. Because the moment you step into that, the external world becomes easy.
Absolutely. You mentioned creating like this inner peace, right? And internal freedom. That's so important. Like, how would you define that? Like, what does that mean for people? And how can we start to grow that within our lives and create this like internal sanctuary, if you will?
Beautiful question. My favorite way of looking at freedom is a quote from the Greek philosopher and writer Nikos Katsankis. So what he said is, I want nothing. I fear nothing. I am free. And those three sentences, I believe, embody really what the Buddha taught us 2,500 years ago. That all of our suffering arises due to attachment. Either we want something that we don't have, and so we start to cling and desire. I wish I had this. I wish I could achieve this. Or it arises from aversion. This is in my life and I wish it wasn't. I wish that disease, I wish that loss, I wish that defeat wasn't in my life. And so it's the moment that we step out of the present reality of our experience and we go either towards the past or the future and we try to fight with reality. That's when suffering begins. Peace and freedom, on the other hand, are our ability to cultivate this inner equanimity that says, no matter what happens on the outside, I'm going to stay present with whatever arises. And that means instead of sedating ourselves when that gnawing anxiety wells up and all you want to do is run and hide, that means sitting down, closing your eyes, and noticing what is happening in my body right now. Notice the heart that's racing a little faster. Notice the goosebump on my arms. Notice that, pain in my chest because I'm just constricting my muscles. And then it's time to release that. First of all, physiologically, letting go. Taking a few deep breaths, noticing how the belly begins to expand, the chest begins to expand, the shoulders begin to widen again. And then asking ourselves, what kind of thoughts contribute to that feeling? What am I thinking that makes me feel anxious? And what you're going to find is inevitably, it's going to be thoughts either about the past or about the future. The moment we drift into one of these time zones, suffering inevitably arises. And so our job is to come back to the present moment, back to the reality of the here and now, because you can only feel fully and vibrantly alive when you're actually engaged in this very moment.
100%, man. Like, equanimity is so key, right? Just being able to be calm under chaos in a sense. And I feel like we can have a lot of practices that help us with that, right? Whatever it is, like meditation or whatnot. But the key is to, have that internal freedom within the chaos, like within the challenges and all these different things. And that's such a skill that can be developed, right? And once we start to do that, it's like we just start to achieve more and just start to have this internal peace, because we know that the external circumstances no longer dictate our reality. It's really it's really within, and we can't control the outside. But we start to focus on the internal world, man. That's when we start to shift our reality.
That's exactly right. And I mean, in fact, that's the story, at least how it goes, of how the Buddha reached his enlightenment. He sat down under the Bodhi tree with this firm devotion to not get up until he had eliminated all of these attachments. And so he sat down and closed his eyes, and he noticed anxiety arising. And he watched it. And it passed away. And he just noticed. It arose, passed away. He watched, pain arise in the stomach. It arose and it passed away. A thought arose and it passed away. A sensation arose and it passed away. And over again, he would notice that every sensation, every thought, every experience of life, it arises and it passes away. And it's this impermanence of every single experience, good or bad, that allows us to develop equanimity. With the bad stuff, it allows us to recognize that, no matter how painful this is right now, inevitably it's going to end. And that allows us to bring in peace. With the good stuff, the joys, the successes, the wins, it's equally important so we don't get attached. To recognize that, yes, you might be at the absolute high, but that also is going to pass away. And so both towards successes and failures, you learn to develop this equanimous attitude that says, that's not me. That's just outside life changing, but my core stays the same. My essence is pure loving awareness.
Yeah. It's so key, right? Because feelings are temporary. And just being present is so important. Just being able to kind of experience the thing. We may not always want to go through what we're going through, but I feel like it's the most effective way to move through it in a sense, right? And presence is such an important thing. It's just being mindful throughout the day and having this awareness. Like, how can we start to cultivate that within our own lives? Like, how would we start to become more present and be more aware of things that we want to create in our lives?
One of my mentors, she once told me, find what you love and make that your meditation. And I love that so much, because we tend to think of awareness practices as, the sitting down, closing your eyes, and this kind of very rigid, strict practice. But the state of meditation, the state of flow, as positive psychologists would call it, where the default mode network, meaning the brain's monkey mind, the part of you that constantly jumps towards worries and fears and doubts, that part of the mind shuts down, and we're zoomed right into the moment, into the current experience of our life, inside of our body. That experience is available to us not just when we sit down and meditate, but really in any kind of experience in which we're fully engaged. And so one easy way to access that is to find activities or find people that automatically bring that out in you. For me, for example, running out in nature, running along the beach or in the mountains is one of the quickest ways for me to enter a state of meditation. Same for, creating this kind of content, writing, journaling, swimming in the cold water. All of these for me are really flow or meditation triggers. And so if you find that you love gardening, my mom is a big gardener, and she loves nothing more than spending 10 hours a day outdoors, with her plants and growing these beautiful olive trees and plants. For her, that is meditation. Because meditation is a state of being in which there's no more thoughts and there's pure being in here and now. And so you can access that through activities, and the same way as through people. There's this beautiful concept of emotional contagion, which means that we adapt to the emotional state of the people we surround ourselves with. So if you've ever walked into a room and, there's this one person and it's just, you automatically feel this anxiety welling up, that is emotional contagion. But also we all know that person that walks in a room and it's like sunlight has entered, right? Joy begins to spread. So what we want to do is we want to spend more time with people already living in the emotional state that we want to cultivate. If I want peace, I hang out with peaceful people. If I want love, I hang out with the, biggest huggers and, most loving people I could find. Because simply by spending more time with them, that emotion is going to start rubbing off of me. Their behaviors are going to start rubbing off of me. Because in a group of loving people, you cannot be mean and evil. In a group of peaceful people, you cannot be constantly stressed out. In a group of athletes, you cannot smoke and eat badly. And so peer pressure is not good or bad. It's our peers that decide the influence if it's good or bad.
Incredible, man. It's like, it's being able to cultivate this awareness, right? And it's living in the flow, as you mentioned. It's like, I feel like once we start to have these habits with our lives, we start to habit stack in a sense, right? We have all these routines, and just being able to, kind of stack these things on top of each other. Because I find it hard to stay in a negative state if you continue along your day with all these activities that you're doing, things that you love, as you mentioned, right? Positive habits like cold showers, right? Like being able to cultivate this inner strength and be able to essentially have your mind focus on things that you love as opposed to just kind of dwelling in the past or whatever is on your mind.
This reminds me of a beautiful quote from Maslow. He said, "Artists must paint, poets must write, and musicians must make music if they want to be at peace with themselves." And so when you have that calling inside of you, that burning passion, that beautiful purpose, whether it's just focused on you and I want to spend more time in the garden or in nature, or whether it's focused on outside things, on serving others, the more you allow yourself to devote yourself to that, the more peace and joy you're going to feel. And to the degree to which you resist the call, to the degree to which you feel an inner urge to follow your passion, but you resist it, you're going to suffer. And there's some fascinating research that shows that all of us know what makes us happy, right? I call this the happy hour. If you could schedule an hour a day into your calendar with the sole purpose of being happy, what would you do? And most of us, we know exactly the activities or places or things or people that will do that. But then if you ask them, how often do you schedule that into your life? The answer is usually pretty low. And so what we want to do is we want to be more deliberate and intentional with scheduling happiness into our calendar. If I know that in order to have a great evening, I got to hang out with my best friends over dinner, then I'm going to schedule that more. If I know I really prefer, solo time, reading a good book, then instead of going for my default, which might be watching movies, I'm going to schedule that in my calendar, and I'm going to treat it as wholly as a doctor's appointment or a catch up with my boss at work. And so by bringing this intention to our happiness and to our activities, we can actually literally put it in the calendar.
Yeah, so being very intentional about these things, right? And just being able to cultivate that positivity within our lives. So if we actually stay focused on what we want, it's like you don't have time for the negativity either.
That's absolutely right. And there's this beautiful idea, I think, that so many of us that live in our mind, right, in the kind of mental world, including me, right, with theories and all of that. When people start to overthink, it becomes a huge problem because the dumb village boy, if you will, kicking the ball with all the other village idiots is much happier than the greatest genius sitting on the sidelines trying to figure out life. And Kierkegaard said that the point of life is not to figure it all out in the head. It's the experience of being alive. And I think that's ultimately what we tend to miss, is when we try to figure out life too much and we try to plan and scheme and make our 10-year goals and visions. It's a beautiful thing, but if we don't come back to the present moment, then we're missing out on the experience of being alive.
Right.
And so, much more importantly than trying to figure out life is actually living it.
Exactly. Just overthinking things and just you gotta stay in action, right? It's like, and also trust. Like you gotta trust the process, right? Have faith, have the strong belief, right? And if you don't have certainty or clarity in something, just have courage or faith, right? Instead of like fear. I feel like fear can be used as a tool if we know how to use it, right? But it's like we don't want to let us hold us back in any type of way, essentially.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Like fear can be a beautiful guiding mechanism because every fear really reveals something inside of you that has not yet been undressed or addressed. Sorry. And so what it means is if I have a fear of spiders, well, that's something, I might want to address. If I don't live in Australia, maybe where I face them all the time, it doesn't really matter. But if I have a fear of being unlovable, if I have a fear of success, if I have a fear of, meeting other people and speaking up at work, well, then those fears are literally the guiding lights telling us where to go next. Where your fear is, said Jung, there is your task. The dragons that we manage to fight, they actually give us the strength for future fights. And so our chief task in life really is to become more aware of all of those fears, of all of those doubts, and then to deliberately face them instead of trying to sedate ourselves out of them.
Yeah, 100%. I would imagine gratitude plays a huge role in positive psychology, right? Like, how can we start to cultivate that in our lives and start to, I guess, look at the brighter side of things in a sense? And also, because I feel like what you appreciates as well, right? So just being able to focus on more of what we want in our lives. I feel that's so key.
Absolutely. The way I look at gratitude is really the kind of mother virtue of abundance. Because what does it mean to be grateful? It means my life is already full. I'm already whole. To say I'm grateful for this means I already have this in my life, and how amazing is that? And so it's a beautiful tool to return to the present moment. Now, there's a million different ways of practicing that, right? From counting 3 things you're grateful for while you're brushing your teeth at night, to writing gratitude letters. That's one really powerful way I found. To old colleagues or friends or mentors, because it's creates a greater sense of gratitude inside of us, which research shows, by the way, over the next few months is going to improve both your mental well-being as well as your physical health. Meaning people that express gratitude consistently actually go to a doctor less, have to go to a doctor less, I should say. That's a great way to do this, right? A gratitude journal. But it doesn't just have to be these formal ways. When I'm watching a sunset, I can think to myself, wow, how lucky am I to get this, experience this right now. And so true gratitude is the ability to savor the present moment without constantly comparing it to someone else or something else. I don't look at the Mona Lisa and I'm like, he really could have changed her eye color a little bit. I don't look at the most beautiful sunset and I say, this is really nice, but, if there was a little more red here and a little more yellow there, that'd be really cool. No, I just stay in front of the beauty of life and I admire it without constantly judging or comparing it. And that is what gratitude is all about. And so there's different ways or other ways even that we can bring into our lives. For example, one way I like to look at it is this idea of pre-gratitude. The beautiful thing about the human brain is that it cannot tell the difference between reality and our vivid imagination. So if you think back to the last horror movie you watched, why do we get scared when the guy comes in, with the axe? It's because our brain actually thinks in that moment it's real. And so the amygdala, the brain's fear center, begins to sound the alarm and it hijacks us into fight, flight, or freeze. Now, we can also use this for the positive, because when you imagine things in the future, that you're going to be grateful for. That great victory, falling in love, feeling healthy and abundant and alive. Well, your brain cannot tell the difference. And so it actually thinks it's real. And so you can cultivate a sense of gratitude, a sense of peace, a sense of wholeness in the here and now. Even if nothing out there in your life right now feels like it should give you any reason why. And the great thing, as you say, is the moment we cultivate gratitude or abundance, we begin to attract these things. Because now your brain starts looking for them. Now you're training, again, your reticular activating system to look for things in your life that are going well. If you look for the bad, it's going to be there. But if you look for the good, it's going to overwhelm you. Because life has both. And whatever you choose to focus on, whatever you choose to look for, it's going to be there.
Absolutely. It's like almost having a sense of awe, in a sense.
Absolutely. And it's just, what I've found is, I've spent the last decade of my life really traveling the world. And to many degrees also chasing the sense of awe in, greater travels and more remote mountains and more, quiet beaches. But the sense of awe that we're talking about here that is available anywhere you go. You don't need a fancy vacation. You don't need a trip to the Himalayas. You don't need a beautiful sunrise to feel awe or wonder or beauty in your life. Every single day, every conversation, every walk in a park enables us to find these moments of beauty, these moments of joy. And when we begin to deliberately savor them and cultivate them and look for them, we're going to find them. Yeah. And so when we can find awe in the ordinary, then the extraordinary becomes even more magical.
100%. I feel like every single day we have an opportunity to train our minds, right? Whatever circumstance it is, we can make good out of it, right? And I feel like some people were just kind of repeating the same circumstances that we don't want. And it's not until we start to become aware and present and start to ask questions that are really empowering, right? Like, I feel like we ask negative questions, but if we start to shift it to like, what can I learn from this? Is there anything I can shift? And you start to make adjustments within your day, right? And you just can make that forward progress and growth over time. I feel like it's kind of how you optimize your life in the long term.
Carl Jung always said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And so when we keep stumbling into that same toxic relationship again and again, when we keep setting that goal only to, fall off the wagon, what happens is there's something inside of us, some belief or some emotion, some experience that we haven't yet dealt with. And what we do is we try to kind of sedate it. We try to forget about it, right? We try to kind of hide it in the closet. But inevitably it comes back to haunt us. And so what we want to do is we've got to open the closet, right? We've got to go into these things that we've been trying to hide from and face whatever is currently unconscious. And the moment you make that conscious, the moment you bring awareness to that limiting belief or to that old pattern or to that habit, it's by definition no longer just an unconscious habit. But now we begin to take control over it. Now I can stop myself. I realize I'm falling into this pattern. I'm like, let me stop. Take a deep breath. And choose differently. Choose the pink fluffy unicorn again and again and again.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just having the awareness is so key, right? Because a lot of times we just kind of go throughout our day and we wonder why certain things are the way they are, and we're operating out of old paradigms, old beliefs. And it's not until we start to do some self-assessment, right, that we actually start to understand what our values are, our beliefs, our standards, and all these things, which is really kind of like the infrastructure of our life, right? We start to kind of cultivate these things, and then once we start to kind of calibrate that, we get different results. And it's kind of the seed of it, in a sense.
Absolutely. So the way I look at it is like, life is essentially a scoreboard of our subconscious and our nervous system. And so if there's any area in your life where you're currently falling short of your goals, simply look at, what do I believe about this area of my life? How do I feel about this? What kind of emotions am I cultivating on a consistent basis? If you're trying to get in shape, but you have a belief that says, I'm unworthy of that, I really can't do this, nobody in my body has a six-pack, nobody's ever run a marathon, well then it's going to be very, very hard to actually achieve that. And I can guarantee you almost with 100% certainty that every time that people struggle in a certain area, it's because there's some underlying belief that says, I can't, I'm not worthy, or I don't deserve this. And so until we address that, no amount of external hustling and grinding and trying to change is going to enable us to succeed, because there's always this inner friction.
Yeah. And once we start to kind of relax, just being able to have that peace, it's like we start to create from abundance. And that's when we start to attract things that we want, right? Because success is something that you ultimately attract by personally becoming in the process.
That's exactly it. And that's also where happiness is found, right? It's not in a shiny end goal. It's in, how do I become a little bit more conscious today? How do I become a little more loving today? Can I become a little more courageous today? And what would that look like? Right? What specifically could I do today to develop courage? The ancient philosopher Epictetus, he would actually create a scorecard for himself. And every single night before falling asleep, he would kind of judge, or rather evaluate himself based on how he showed up. Did I act lovingly today? Yes or no? And if not, how can I do better tomorrow? Did I speak truth today? And if not, how can I do better tomorrow? And so tracking ourselves, whether you do that on an iPhone app or through a simple journal, it actually enables us to create conscious awareness of our patterns over time, which makes it a lot easier to change them.
Yeah, that's the key power of self-assessment. All right, Max, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you so much today for coming on the show, sharing your story with us, all your insights. And these are such important tools that we all can utilize in our lives in some way, shape, or form, right? Positive psychology, psychosomatic intelligence. Just being able to have these at top of mind, and just being able to understand, like, this is kind of the science of fulfillment, right? It's like, but it's all personalized in a sense. Like, we all have our own stories, we all have our own journeys. Being able to apply these things, understand that we can kind of move beyond our current circumstances. Our current circumstances don't have to dictate our realities, right? It's really the quality of our decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis. And once we start to filter our decisions through our values and becoming in alignment with what we want, that's where it all starts, right? And we start to see the change in our lives. So we be a model on life for what is possible and live a life of integrity, be of service, and stay on purpose. And that's what it's all about, man. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so if people want to get connected with you and your work, where can we go?
Best way is on my website, psychosomaticintelligence.com. You find a free PSQ test that allows you to actually measure these different neuromuscles and skills so you know exactly where to improve.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you.